Our last lesson was the first half of a two-part series. Can you call it a series if there are two? We talked about anger. We talked about anger a lot. If you learned only about anger and how to eliminate it, you would revolutionize your life and the world around you. I'm not exaggerating. Anger is that harmful and that distracting from our walking a path toward peace and joy. Just the most destructive force on earth. Now, possible competition would be fear. Actually, probably is. But anger is a reaction to fear. There are a lot of people who can be afraid and not cause destruction except to themselves. But with anger, we spread the destruction around just liberally. So what did we talk about last lesson? I'm going to just kind of briefly summarize and add a few comments, and then we're going to kind of keep going on the subject, and then we're going to apply it to some questions that you all have sent in. So the first thing that we talked about is that anger is never caused by other people in the present. Never. And we talked about the metaphors that indisputably prove that. We talked about sunburn, talked about drowning. There are endless metaphors that prove that other people don't cause our anger. We also said that anger is caused by the pain of past events. Pain is cumulative. And each time even just a pinprick occurs in the present, it adds to the 50,000 pinpricks that went before. So each time we get what appears to be a relatively insignificant wound, somebody cuts in front of us in traffic, somebody's late, a child cries, whatever, we're overreacting to whatever's in the present. We're reacting to what seems like 50,000 wounds, because as people come close to us, they touch many of those 50,000 wounds. And so we feel them all. We feel them all because we've drug the past into the present, so that we feel the past in the present. This is the essence of PTSD. People go into battle where they, see their buddies blown up next to them, I talked to a man just the other day who, in war, when people come at you in war, you don't think. And so he shot many of the enemy, but he also shot women and children. And he carries with him the horror of everything that happened in those moments. So the smells, the sights, the sounds, so that if he hears a loud noise, boom, he hits the floor, because he's reacting to all the pain of the past. That PTSD is overreacting to the present because of past wounds. That's how simple it is to define. We're hyperreactive, hypersensitive. And nearly all of us suffer from PCSD, post-childhood stress disorder. We talked about that at length. We were all wounded thousands and thousands of times, almost consecutively and without relief, by the message of "I don't love you," with a sigh, a grunt, a shrug of the shoulders, a rolling of the eyes, a change in the tone of voice. We were told by people when we inconvenienced them that they didn't love us anymore, or at the very least, they didn't love us as much. And for a child, that's just devastation. It's like a grenade going off in their emotional soul. We talked about how anger gives us relief from pain. That's it. That is why we get angry. Without pain, there is no anger. Really. I want you to imagine anger without pain. Imagine that you have no pain in your life. Imagine that there's no fear. Everything in your life is going perfectly. Tell me, under those conditions, why would you get angry? In fact, it's kind of absurd thinking. So it's all about pain. But the part we miss is it's not the pain or the inconvenience of the event happening right now. It's the accumulated pain of a lifetime, even though we don't recognize it. And as we said before, the most significant pains in our life, the most significant events that have shaped our lives, are the events that we don't really have a conscious memory of. We talked in our last lesson about how we get a lot from anger, which is why we use it. We get a sense of power, we get adrenaline, control, we get a sense of less helplessness. So once we've gotten a reward from anger, we tend to use it over and over again. So I talked to a mother hours ago who was writing about how her son gets angry at her over the slightest thing. And she's saying, I just don't understand. Well, it's pretty easy to understand. He's reacting to the way you have treated him all of his life by saying, I don't love you, I don't love you. But it's more than that. After a while, anger becomes a self-reinforcing pattern. And so each time he gets angry, this is me talking to the mother, you react emotionally. So you, for example, tell him to take the garbage out. And he blows up and he says, you're always telling me what to do. Well, that would be a little much of an overreaction to please take out the garbage, which takes all of, 3 minutes. But what he's learned is that now he's not really even so much reacting to pain. He's just learned he gets a lot from it. So as soon as he blows up and says, all you ever do is order me around and tell me what to do, and the instant she even scrunches her eyebrows or closes one eye more than the other or lifts her shoulders in an expression of emotional pain, he's got her and he knows it. All of this, by the way, happens unconsciously. He's not aware that he's doing it so that she'll react emotionally. She's not aware that she's reacting emotionally. It's like the two of them are both actors in a play that they didn't write, they didn't agree to participate in, and they don't even realize that they're participating in. And yet the play goes on. It goes on and on. It's like they're involuntarily conscripted into the play. And it's a play of death. So the instant she reacts emotionally, he goes, well, see, I can get the old hag to, pretty much change her behavior whenever I want to. He blows up. She doesn't like hearing his disapproval. So she goes, well, maybe you could do it in the morning, which of course means, never. She's going to end up doing it in the morning. So we get a lot from it, which is why we do it. It's why our children do it. It's why we do it with our partners. It's why our bosses do it with us. It's why we do it with our bosses. But there is a huge problem with anger. In fact, a fatal flaw, if you like, with anger. And that is it distracts us from eliminating the pain that's at the root of it. As long as we're angry, we're enjoying the power and the control. We love it. We love the feeling of power and control. So why would we ever address the real cause? Almost exactly, maybe I should eliminate the word almost, exactly like a cocaine addict. The drug eliminates his pain. So as long as it does, why would he work on, for example, being responsible? Why would he work on lousy relationships? The drug is consistently effective. Now, the effect is hollow, the effect is superficial, the effect is temporary, but it's consistent. Whereas everything else in his life has failed. He hasn't had any unconditional love. So to eliminate the pain in his life, the cocaine addict snorts one up each side and feels better. So of course he uses the drug. And it's the same with anger. It is a drug. It's a drug that temporarily dulls our unbearable emotional pain. And as long as it works, we're satisfied. And it prevents us from addressing the cause of our pain, which is why we use anger. So in short, anger perpetuates the pain that causes it. So we're stuck. We're screwed. The only way to get out of our pain for real is to use something other than a pain reliever. But the pain reliever works, so we keep using it and we're stuck. We never can address the pain. Anger communicates a great deal about us. When we're angry, we communicate that we're victims. This mother that I was talking to, she was talking about how her son was whining and complaining about everything that she said to him. And I was explaining to her the game that victims play. And at one point I said, when victims, whatever, I don't remember. And she blew up at me and she said, that's my son you're talking about. And I thought, I wonder where he learned victimhood. So here she was asking me how to help her son. I was describing the fact that he's stuck in a loop of victimhood, and she responded by being a victim. And anger is always preceded by victimhood. Why would I ever become angry at you unless I first either was victimized by you or believed that I was? In fact, once we've started a loop of victimhood, you don't really have to do anything to me. I'll make up a reason for my feeling like a victim. Because again, with victimhood, as with anger, we get a lot from it. It communicates a lack of responsibility on our part. Every single time I say, I'm so angry, what's the rest of it? At you, at him, at her, at the government, at some conspiracy theory, at whatever. But, once in a blue moon, like once in 100 times, I'll hear somebody say, I'm so angry at myself. Well, maybe that's pretty rare, but almost invariably, even that we're communicating our anger at something somebody else did. We communicate that we don't believe in the law of choice. When I'm angry at you, what I'm saying is, yeah, I believe everybody has the right to choose what they think and say and do until they do something that I don't like. It's unbelievably arrogant. When I'm angry, I'm saying that everybody in the world has a responsibility to make who happy? Me. It's selfish, incredibly selfish. How could I possibly be angry and be selflessly caring about your happiness? Impossible. I communicate that I'm willing to live in a prison. I communicate a belief that it will work, anger will work to make me happy. In other words, I have a faith in the happiness-producing power of anger, which is like insane, despite the fact that anger has never brought me anything but sorrow and ignites every conflict in my life. So, wow, when I get angry, I communicate a long list of things about myself, not one of which is good. It's a very telling expression. So anger multiplies, it spreads like a fire. It makes happiness impossible. It physically kills us. Stress is the number one killer in the country. And I mean, even recent studies have actually proven that stress is as big a risk factor in health as smoking, for example. Stress is the worst. It's the most common cause of heart disease, which is the greatest killer. So if it does all of those things, every single effect of anger is negative, well, then it would qualify as just plain wrong and stupid because it doesn't work. I don't mean wrong and stupid as in you're wrong and stupid. Well, actually, maybe I do. It's horrible. It doesn't have a positive use. Now, people have asked me, so you're telling me I can't be angry? No, didn't say that. If you're angry and that's all you can muster up, great. But then communicate your anger to someone who's capable of loving you, as opposed to wallowing in it for the rest of your life, essentially rendering you the walking dead. We also learned that anger can be eliminated, and the process of eliminating it just isn't all that complicated. First, we need to become aware of our anger, not deny it, not sugarcoat it, not lie about it, and then feel loved. And the two are intertwined. So the more loved I feel, the safer I feel, and the more able I am to tell the truth about my anger and to say that it's wrong and stupid. As I do that, I create opportunities for people to love me more unconditionally. The more loved I feel, the more safe I am to tell more truth about my anger, and so on. It's, in this case, a self-perpetuating spiral upward, whereas most spirals that we talk about are destructive. So the conclusion that we came to last week is that when you're angry, there's not a single thing you say or do that's going to be productive. Nothing. And yet we keep doing it. I can tell you from personal embarrassing experience, and I wish I could say that it was all far, far in the past, but I can tell you from personal experience that I have tried on many occasions to express my anger articulately, justified by facts, to do it without, while I was trying to hide it. It doesn't work. If we're angry, there's nothing we say or do that's going to be productive in the long run. Sure, as you're angry, you may get your child to clean up his room faster, but now you have a clean room and an unhappy child. Is that, really a difficult decision to make, whether that's smart? So if there's not a thing that you will say or do that will be productive when you're angry, then the solution is pretty obvious, right? Shut up. I talked to a couple recently, and very recently, she'd had 2 affairs. And so the focus was kind of obviously on her. I mean, her crime, if you like, was much more glaring. She'd gone out and had sex with 2 other guys, which was, really devastating to her husband. And he was the aggrieved party, as they used to say in the old days in wartime situations. So he felt offended, and the focus was on her. And I asked him about his behavior. And it turns out he's been critical and angry toward her from pretty much, she believes, and he agreed after some questioning, pretty much after about the first week that they were married. And they've been married for 12 years. She was finally, after all of those years, absolutely fed up with his being critical and angry. Now, why did she put up with it for 12 years? Because she had been raised, she walked in the room, she was 35 years old, and she looked like she was still the, captain of the cheerleading squad. The perfect little figure, the blonde hair, the makeup. She looked like she was, still 17, at least close. And she walked in with this absolutely perfect smile on her face. Perfect. Just, as though she were posing for a photographer. And I walked up to her and I held her face in my hands and I said, honey, you just radiate pain. She burst into tears. And I sat and held her for, I don't know, probably half an hour or so, until finally she quit smiling. She had been taught from the time she was a little girl, this is a real trap. When you have a radiant smile like this chick did, everywhere you go, people say, oh, I just love seeing you. Oh, you're so beautiful. Oh, your smile lights up the room. Oh, and what they're really telling you is, keep lighting up the room. You make me feel good. And so she had felt absolutely trapped all of her life by pleasing people. So what did she do? She married a guy who put her in the same trap. He said, oh, you're so beautiful. You make me so happy when you smile. Well, after a while, you get kind of tired of smiling. Really. I went on a speaking tour in China once, and at just one gathering that I can remember where there were several thousand people, we counted over 2,000 photographs that I took in a single day. They really like taking pictures, especially when they think you're a rock star. I guess we managed to fool them all. And by the end of the day, I was kind of tired of smiling. That was one day of smiling. So imagine this chick. She's been smiling from the time she was a little kid. People have been telling her how attractive and beautiful and sweet and kind and responsible and so on she was, as long as she was smiling and doing what they liked. Well, that wears off. You get tired of doing it. And as soon as she would get tired of doing it, her husband would become critical and angry. And he tried to say it nice, but he was still angry, and it was just crushing her. In fact, she'd been trapped by anger all of her life, because even though people wouldn't necessarily get mad at her when she didn't smile, they would express their disapproval. which is really less approval is the same as anger. It has the same effect. And so he finally realized that he had just as much to do with this as she did. So I helped them see how she'd been trapped all of her life, and how now she was blaming it all on her husband, and how she had completely detached from him. So now he's angry at her for not pleasing him, and she's angry at him for trapping her into pleasing him. So everybody's angry. So I gave them different assignments. Usually do that. She had withdrawn sex from him, for example, for 5 or 6 years, and he controlled her constantly. So her assignment was to have sex with him. Now, why would that be her assignment? Because it's absolutely the simplest way to express love. Sounds like it would be like the last thing you'd ask her to do. No, it's actually pretty uncomplicated. Sex really just isn't all that complicated anatomically, so pretty easy thing to pull off. Whereas become a kind and loving person, that takes time. So her job was to not resist his having sex, and the maximum was going to be twice a week, so it's not like we were turning her into a sex slave. And his assignment was to shut up. I mean, shut up all the time. I mean, every time he thought of something critical to say, he was to shut up, which is, the subject of our PowerPoint slide here. And I talked to them just 1 week later. And turns out he actually said to her, it's kind of relaxing not to have to manage everybody and what they do. And as he quit expressing his anger at her, she became more relaxed and kinder and loving to him. So he actually enjoyed giving up his anger, because not only did he shut up, but he just let the anger go. I said, you can't just hide the anger and shut up. No, I mean, you have to shut up in your head too. And he did that. And he said, I kind of like this. As a result, she felt hopeful. She felt more affectionate toward him. And the two of them are beginning to build their marriage. All as a result of what we're talking about here. When you're angry, there isn't anything you can say or do that will be productive, so shut up. Now, more about anger, not from the last lesson. So how do you help another person who is angry? What do we normally do when people get angry? Well, we defend ourselves naturally, because anger is an emotional attack. Anger is an emotional attack just as real as coming at somebody with a knife or hitting them with a fist is a physical attack. It's that literal. Really, that's how it feels to people. So you come at somebody with your fists raised or with a knife raised, they will defend themselves. That's what people do when you come at them with anger. It's always selfish. It always communicates to the person that you're angry at. Would that be the anger victim, the anger recipient? There we go. It always communicates, I don't love you, which in turn worsens their anger, because they're angry in response. I'm sorry, let me back up. We defend ourselves, which is a form of I don't love you. We communicate that to the person who is angry, which makes them feel more empty and afraid, and then their anger gets worse. So clear? Defending ourselves, although it's entirely natural and understandable, is actually a selfish act. Now, many people have a hard time hearing that because they believe that if somebody's angry at you, the only option is to defend yourself. But we're going to get to how that's not true. So you attack me with anger. I defend myself. When I defend myself, who am I thinking about? Me. And I'm saying, I don't love you. Well, the only reason you attacked me in the first place was because you didn't feel loved. And now I'm adding to it by, well, I don't love you even more. Your anger gets worse. And then we're in the spiral. So we're both screaming, I don't love you in different ways. You may be attacking, I may be running, which is a really common dynamic in relationships, especially marriage. But it's all still, I don't love you. Just like with this couple that I was talking about. He'd be angry at her. She'd withdraw from him, emotionally, sex, other ways. And then he'd get angrier and she'd withdraw even more to the point where they hadn't been physically intimate in 5 or 6 years. So what can we do differently? We have to see the cause of somebody's anger. We have to see their pain. So then we don't try to change people. We don't get angry in return, because when we get angry in return, we're trying to change people. We see their pain and everything changes. We tend to resent people who get angry, when really what we need to do is love them. We actually need them. We're here to learn to be loving. It's the highest purpose in our existence, no kidding, is to learn to be loving. To learn to deal with others while they're angry. We learn love by interacting with them. If you want to learn to lift heavy weights, what do? You lift heavier and heavier weights. Everybody knows this about physical training. Well, how in the world do you think you become more loving? You love people who are more and more difficult to love. People who aren't easy. People who are not doing what you want. I come away with interactions with some people who are particularly hateful, and I think, well, I learned a lot from that one. I don't always enjoy the interaction, but I learn a lot from it, from the most difficult people. Those are the people who teach me the most. Now, occasionally I like a vacation where I'm not being attacked and being taught something, but as I look back over my life at the things that taught me the most, they were also the most difficult. So how do we love somebody who's angry? It's kind of obvious that love is the solution to anger, because anger is a response to fear. I would suggest that the first step, and probably the most important step, is the subject of our entire lesson, number 6. Listen. We listen terribly. So, for example, the other person says to you, I'm angry at what you did. So what do we then tend to do? Oh, well, mostly stupid things. We defend ourselves. We say, I didn't do that. Or we say, well, you do that too, which just leads to more anger and contention, and it's just crap. What if instead we listened? What if our first step was to listen? So you say to me, I am so angry at what you did. And you're specific. You name what I did. I was inconsiderate, or I was late answering a phone call, or whatever. And I say, I did that. What a moron. In fact, I had a chance to say that to somebody earlier today. I was doing something. Somebody came to the door. I was actually in the house, and I get distracted by talking to somebody in person, and completely forgot that I had a 3:00 appointment to talk to somebody. I said, you're absolutely right. I was an idiot. There's no excuse. And if I can then give you other examples of my being thoughtless, I can say, I was late once before when you called. I ought to pay attention to that. What are you going to do now? You're feeling listened to. You're feeling loved. Because when you attack me with knife and gun in each hand, and I listen, what I'm doing is I am laying down all my weapons of defense, which is an indication of what? I'm not thinking of myself. Well, if I'm not thinking of myself and there's only the two of us in the interaction, who does that leave? I'm thinking about you. I'm caring about you. I am loving you. Or what if somebody comes at you and they don't specify the particular thing you did? They just said, I'm just angry at you. Again, it's easy to answer. Listen to them. They're angry at you because you have in some way communicated, I don't love you. That's always the reason. It may have been an inconvenience. It may have been you took their socks. It doesn't matter. It's always about love. And you say, well, I do a lot of stupid things that inconvenience you. What was it that I did this time? Now, it's all about tone of voice. If you say, well, I'm sure I do a lot of things that are stupid. What I do this time, that's not going to come across as listening. But if we genuinely listen, we're setting aside all of our weapons and caring about the other person. It's a very disarming experience. Another way that we can help somebody who is angry is to help them express their anger in English. In children, we see anger expressed indiscriminately most of the time. children huff and puff and roll their eyes like this mother who was talking to me just hours ago, and they throw things or they hit their brother. We put our kids in school for 7 to 8 hours a day learning geometry and history, and most of these subjects they're never going to use for the rest of their lives. No kidding. But we don't teach them how to live. We can't ever allow an indiscriminate expression of anger in our families to go by pretty much ever. It's too important. You wouldn't allow somebody to come in and poop in the middle of your living room on the carpet, would you? You'd say something. You might be astonished at first, but you'd say something. You wouldn't allow somebody to walk their dog into your living room and take a dump on your carpet. And yet, we allow anger to be expressed indiscriminately in our families all the time, and anger is far more dangerous than poop on the carpet, let me tell you. We can't let it happen ever, because anger works in the short term, but it kills us in the long term. Children use anger because they get what they want. And if we don't say something, then what do we just teach the child who is angry? You just taught your child who blew up at their brother, or their sister, or whoever, that with anger they can manipulate almost anybody. The mother that I was talking to hours ago, who was talking about her teenage son, she was saying, well, but I can't always be talking to him when he's angry. Yeah, actually you can. I mean, the teacher puts a red mark or says something every single time the kid makes a mistake in geometry, which frankly doesn't matter spit. And yet at home, we don't say something about anger. And so what's happened is this mother's just, relatively recent in real love. So for, let's make it up, 13 years, she's been teaching the child that he can manipulate everybody around him by being angry and acting like a victim. So what do you think the kid does? He manipulates everybody around him by being angry and acting like a victim. Then she learns about real love and she says, well, we're not going to be doing that anymore. Oh, horrible experience for the first few weeks, because you've come along after 13 years and changed the rules. You've essentially redefined gravity. You've redefined what north and south are for this kid. And let me tell you, this kid's going to fight you, because the kid is used to having some measure of control over his environment by being angry and acting like a victim. But we can't allow that to happen, even though he's going to kick and scream and fight you every step of the way in the beginning, because this is a deadly lesson that the child will carry throughout childhood and throughout life. So later, when this child gets married and has an absolutely horrifying marriage, and children who end up on drugs and in the penitentiary, everybody's going to be going, well, gosh, what happened? We didn't teach him that at home. Yeah, actually, you did. You may not have taught him how to move into the penitentiary, but what you taught him is that with anger and victimhood, you can manipulate everybody around you. And as the kid gets older, he's going to try to manipulate the wrong person with anger and victimhood, and somebody's going to smash him in the face, and he's going to pull a gun and kill him, and poof, he's in the penitentiary. I work with convicts all the time, and as they tell me the stories of their lives, with tears running down their face as I teach them the principles of real love, they say, if somebody had taught me this when I was a kid, I wouldn't be here. And they're right. A child or an adult who regularly expresses anger to get their way lives a kind of living death. They're like a moving corpse. It's a horrifying existence. I'm working with a mother now who's always been intimidated by her daughter's anger. So she's always given in from the time that the kid was, she guesses probably 3 or 4 years old. And if the mother can remember that, it was probably earlier. And so the daughter's now 16. Well, she's had, let's just round it off. The daughter has had 16 years to practice controlling everybody with anger. Frankly, the kid's pretty darn good at it. And the mother is now changing the rules. Well, the daughter is not grateful. I got a really entertaining email from the daughter just a few days ago, where the daughter wrote me angrily and sarcastically telling me, well, first in the beginning of her email, she said, "What do you think you are, God, that you can ruin my life?" And then later in the email, she changed her mind and decided I was the devil. So that was quite an excursion from God to the devil. She's been now lashing out at her mother and blaming her mother for changing the rules. And she wrote me to tell me that I had ruined her happiness. Well, in her life, she's right. Because what is the 16-year-old daughter's definition of happiness? Getting what she wants. That's her definition. Well, once you've allowed a child to be angry, and they believe that happy means getting what they want, they're pretty much screwed for life, because they're going to try that with everybody. And, they're going to get away with it with most people, but probably not their employers, who are going to fire them, and probably not their partners who are going to divorce them, and probably not with their children, who are going to end up screaming and manipulating them in exactly the way that this 16-year-old girl is. So she's going to raise a daughter who's going to do the same thing to her. So how do we help? In a child's case, for example, you can be as angry as you want, but you have to say it in English. One mother called me yesterday and said that her child called her a really foul name, which I don't really care to repeat all that much. And the mother said, "She can't talk to me like that." And I said, "Oh, no, that's actually excellent that your child is expressing their anger more directly. But now you have to encourage your child to express it in clear English, not just in foul language or expletives, because that's really kind of a lazy way of expressing anger, kind of like stand-up comedians who get laughs by using foul words. It's really cheap and easy. So the guideline is that in a family, in a relationship, in the workplace, everywhere, there is no unfocused anger. You have to be able to express it in words. One way that children really catch on to this really pretty quickly is that there's no indiscriminate pooping in the house. Every child understands this. Children absolutely love poop metaphors. As long as you use poop metaphors, they'll listen to you pretty much all day long. Just like young boys never tire of passing gas. They laugh at it every time. In fact, by young boys, I mean till they're about 90. So you tell children, where do we poop in our house? Well, we poop in the toilet. Pooping's okay, but there's a way to do it. We use the toilet. Everybody understands this. It's okay to be angry, but there's a way to do it. We do it in English. So it's okay, for example, for the brother to say to his younger brother, "I'm just mad as hell at you because you took my basketball out of my room and left it outside and I couldn't find it and had to look for it for an hour." That's fine, no problem. But just to call them names or to hit them, no, that's pooping. And that applies to both parents and children. Now, this is beautiful because you say to the children, we have to live by the same rules. It's a really huge mistake that we make as parents, that we expect our children to live by rules we don't keep. So if they can't poop in the living room, neither can we. And they will love to point it out to you. So if you say something to your children while you're angry, they just love to say, because I've done this with hundreds of families, they love to say, "Mom, we don't poop in the living room." So if you're driving along in the car, for example, and you've got two kids in the back seat fighting, you just pull over to the side of the road and you say, "You guys go out there in the bushes and you can poop out there." And the kids understand exactly what you're talking about, and they learn to express themselves articulately, more importantly, productively. Now, with a spouse, you can't make your spouse say it in English. Now, we don't poop in the living room. Probably won't work as well with a spouse. But you can create the opportunity for your spouse to express their anger in English. And how do you do that? You do that by listening. So, for example, earlier we talked about someone saying to you, I'm angry at what you did. Well, if you respond with, well, you do that too, or we defend ourselves, we're just going to get more anger. Whereas if we say, I really did do that, you are right. And then you talk about the anger. Well, of course you're angry. I understand that. You understand their anger. You don't try to make it go away. By your listening, you allow your partner to have a safe place to express it in English. Now, instead of your partner blowing up at you, because you're listening, which is a form of loving, then your partner will then tend to explain how it's, inconvenient when you do that. When you leave the car engine that you're working on in the living room. Now we're talking about it instead of just exchanging expletives or anger or irritation or disappointment or stomping out of the room. Perhaps the biggest single reason that people get angry is that they're not being listened to. Nobody's listening, so they resort to anger. So how do we help our partners to express it in English? We listen. We have to get rid of the anger, or there cannot be relationships. There can't be love. So what are the benefits of losing anger? Well, the first kind of obvious one is happy. Anger makes happiness absolutely impossible. Now, losing anger alone doesn't create happiness. In fact, losing anger can just kind of create a kind of neutrality, kind of limbo. In fact, some people without anger are just kind of lost. They don't know what to say. This man that I was talking about, whose wife had a couple of affairs, when he shut his mouth, he discovered that if he wasn't angry, he didn't know what to say at all. He said he felt like a mute. But after we lose our anger, we can begin to take the steps toward happiness, which is not the same as the absence of anger. And we've talked on a number of occasions of how we get to happy, which is really becoming loving. And being happy, what greater reason do we need than that? The greatest reason to be alive is to be happy. And anger eliminates that possibility. Happiness just becomes possible when we eliminate anger. Another benefit of losing anger is peaceful. Take away somebody's anger. I've had the opportunity to do this on many occasions when people have been talking about their anger toward me, when they've been talking about their anger toward their spouse, their child. And as I have loved them and their anger has disappeared, I've gotten to watch their faces. It's a remarkable thing. I've seen it thousands of times. I've watched people come in angry and then their faces just turn to peace. Now, peace alone may not be the same as happy, but it's sure an indispensable part of it. And related to peace, as we lose our anger, it is a great deal less work. While we're angry, our adrenaline is pumping. We have to remember what we're mad about. Have you ever been in an argument? You've been mad and you forgot what you were mad about. It's kind of embarrassing. We have to defend ourselves all the time. We have to fully engage our brains to be competent at defending ourselves. We certainly, in the middle of an argument, can't screw up and make a mistake and misspeak. We have to be watchful. We have to be hypervigilant, just like in PTSD. Just trembling with the energy of protecting ourselves, defending ourselves. It's exhausting. It's a lot of work, and it's distress, and it's conflict, and it's pain. By comparison, losing anger is enormously easy, even blissful, almost effortless. There was a man named Maurice Bickham who spent 37 years in one of the Louisiana state prisons for a crime that he didn't commit. And when he eventually was released, he was asked how he felt about it. He said, "I don't have 1 minute's regret. It was a glorious experience." Now, I found that staggering. Not just I didn't resent it, It was a glorious experience. He chose not to allow anger to ruin the rest of his life, or frankly, to ruin the 37 years that he spent in a Louisiana state prison, which is, to me, unspeakably remarkable. Anger is such a waste of life. It's a waste of our time. It's a waste of our energy. It's a waste of our love. It's a waste of our joy. It's a waste of living. It's a living death. The 16-year-old girl that I mentioned earlier who would rage at her mother and scream at her and run into her room and put up barricades, furniture behind the door so their mother couldn't get inside the room. This girl's life is ruined, already ruined. She's going to continue this pattern of destroying her own life and the lives of the people around her, including her future daughter. As much as she hates the way her mother treats her, she's going to grow up and raise her daughter in much the same way. This girl's life is already wasted or ruined unless the mother has the guts to help this girl change this pattern of anger and manipulation, which takes enormous courage, because when you change the rules and say, we're not going to use anger anymore, the kid is left for a while going, well, then how do I ever get what I want? And if the child was able to articulate it clearly, the child would say, well, the only time I've ever gotten what I want is when I've gotten angry at you. So if I don't, I don't see how I'm ever going to get anything. And the reasoning is valid, because very often we don't respond to our children or to other people until there's a fire. We put out fires. We manage crises. And if all we do is manage crises, well, then guess what? The people around us are going to manufacture crises. They're going to use them. They're going to use anger. And there have been many examples of people who have conquered their anger. Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. I remember reading that in high school and being profoundly moved by it, although I couldn't have told you why. I just know that I read it twice, and I didn't read anything twice, about how his experience in a concentration camp, and I think it was Auschwitz, but I'm not entirely sure, but where his wife and his children and his brothers and sisters and mother and father had all been killed, and yet he learned in that environment to be more loving and to find the meaning of life. So if he can do it in a concentration camp, surely I can do it, even though I'm surrounded by people who are often angry and not loving. Another man who had been in prison for 26 years and found innocent when he was released was asked, aren't you angry? And he said, I'm not going to waste 1 minute more of my life thinking about that experience. No, anger. It's possible. I can't tell you how many people have said to me, well, it's just not possible. It's just not possible to have no anger in your life. It's natural. Well, yeah, it is natural. And look at the world. It's natural, all right, and it's destroying us. It's destroying individuals, families, countries. It's just a venom. I was in a group once of men who were doing, I can't remember, it's been years ago, but it was some kind of men's support group. And one man was being really particularly hateful toward me. He really doubted the idea that unconditional love could exist. And because he didn't believe that it existed, he had to attack me and discredit the possibility. He was attributing to me every hurtful motivation that he had ever seen in the people in his life who had injured him. So he was suffering from PCSD. He was attacking me as though I were his mother, his father, his boss, his brothers, anybody who had ever hurt his feelings. He was afraid and protecting himself thoroughly. The tension in the room was palpable. He was becoming angrier and angrier. Even though it was directed at me, everybody in the room was becoming terrified of this man's attack. He finally stood up and stood over me at a distance of several feet. So I got up from my seat across the room. I touched him slowly. Don't approach angry people quickly. Touched him on the shoulder and just held him for several minutes. Then I sat him down, held him again, sat by him, held his hand for 2 hours for the remainder of the meeting. He turned to putty. He was like a puppy wanting to be stroked and loved. I had contact with him every day for weeks after that. He called just to ask, "Do you still love me?" This is the guy who was screaming at me in a meeting just weeks before. It changed his life. That could never have happened if I had reacted to his anger as pretty much every other man had in his life, by defending myself or being angry in return. When I don't react to anger in kind, I can be a blessing to others, but the biggest blessing is the peace that I get. Occasionally, yeah, I can be a blessing in the life of the angry person too. And we're still close friends, this man and I, now 20 years later. In fact, I'm going to see him later this month in person. An angry woman called me. She told me how I was ruining her life. And how everybody else in her life was ruining her life. And I taught her slowly, patiently, it took a while, how destructive her anger was, how selfish it was, how it was killing her and everybody around her. She had to recognize it. And then taught her how to find real love, how to trust it, and remember it. She called weeks later and said that she dances around the house singing, "My daddy loves me, so nobody can hurt me." And the tune to that is Nanny, Nanny Boo Boo, in case you want to try that at home. What she was expressing was the freedom that comes from losing anger. She felt loved and understood, and so her anger evaporated. But it started with her being aware of it. Like we talked about, how to get rid of anger, awareness and love. That's all I did with her. Helped her to see it, and then loved her in her anger. In fact, sometimes people will say, and you got to have both, not just the awareness. Sometimes people will write me and they'll say, I would have called and told you about my anger, but I already knew what you were going to say, so I didn't call. Well, A, you don't know what I'm going to say. I never know what I'm going to say. And B, even if you knew what I was going to say, you can't say it to yourself and have the same effect. You can't say to yourself, well, my anger is selfish and unloving, but I love me anyway. It doesn't have the same effect as when somebody else says that to you. So we really need to reach out and be aware of our anger and allow other people to care about us. A friend of mine who speaks a language in India called Telugu taught me a poem, and I was going to give you the poem with the Telugu pronunciation, but I figure I was going to botch it, so I'll just give you the translation. The poem goes like this: one's anger is one's enemy. One's calmness is one's protection. Kindness becomes a relative. One's happiness is heaven. One's sorrow is hell. That is the truth. So back to the benefits of losing anger. We're happy, we're peaceful, it's much less work, and it's far less pain to those around you. Is there anything more crushing than the anger of another person, which says, I don't love you? So when you're angry, you're destroying the people around you and yourself. It makes loving relationships impossible. Eliminate your pain with love and awareness and your subsequent anger, and you could address the pain of others. Finally, and relationships become possible. As this mother of the 16-year-old is learning to be loving toward her daughter, her anger will eventually melt. I know personally the effects of anger. Oh, too well. How many times have I done that? As we become afraid, as we become angry, we lash out like with a sledgehammer in both hands at the people around us, everywhere, indiscriminately, often blindly and unaware of the effects of what we're doing. And then we wonder why we're slipping on the blood of the wounded people around us. We create our own pain. We create more and more of it as we express our anger. So changing all this is pretty tough. We have to sober up from a lifetime of crap and lies and selfishness. And when we can do that, it's a miracle. I talked to a mother today about the pain of her teenage son. She taught him to manipulate her and everybody with his size and anger and victimhood. And now she's changing the rules. Boy, he's just kicking and fighting and scratching. And she said, this is so hard. In fact, she got angry at me for teaching her how to eliminate the anger in her son by loving him. But I said, so what's the alternative? What would you do? If you don't point out to him each time he gets angry and love him and teach him, what's the alternative? The alternative is to keep doing what you're doing because you don't have a better alternative. And then he's going to end up doomed. Overall, real love is far and away the easiest thing to do in the long term. In the beginning, it's harder because everybody around us doesn't behave in an unconditionally loving way. Pretty much everybody. She says, well, sometimes I love him and he just melts. And then he goes to school and I don't understand. He comes home and he's angry again. Well, honey, at school, how endemic is victimhood? Victimhood's everywhere. Everywhere you go, people talk about those stupid people, my stupid parents, those stupid teachers, the stupid principal, the stupid government, the stupid driving rules, the stupid... We complain about each other all day long. So our children go out in the world and they hear victimhood and anger all day, and then they come home and we tell them that no, the way the entire world lives is wrong. So it's little wonder that it's hard, at least in the beginning, to communicate to our children that there's another way to do this. There is no solution in anger. Not long ago, I watched a movie called Kingdom of Heaven. It's a fascinating portrayal of the Crusades. The Christians, when they took Jerusalem, slaughtered all the Muslims in the city, killed them all, men, women, and children. When the Muslims retook the city, at least according to the history of the movie, which, sometimes they take liberties with the history, but at least often they're sort of close. When the Muslims retook the city, the courage of the Christian commander was such that the Muslim leader offered them safe conduct out of the city, that he wouldn't kill any of them. And the leader of the Christians said, but years ago when we took the city, we slaughtered all of you. And the leader of the Muslims said, I am not those men. I am Salahuddin. His implication was he was above that. He was above taking retribution and acting simply out of anger. And we can all learn to do that. Our behaviors can be quite subtle. Our anger can be quite subtle. Everything from raging to the most simple expression of disappointment. But it's all destruction. And love can save us all, frees us from the addictions that we have and the destructive behaviors we have, including anger. It's not more work. The love causes miracles naturally. In the presence of love, anger melts away. Every morning here in Georgia, the grass is covered with dew. Well, sometimes I want to go out and mow the grass or whatever while it's covered with dew, which would be pretty stupid. And I never get out there and dry off the lawn with towels before I walk on it. I just wait for the sun to rise. And the sun evaporates the dew. Just as love evaporates the conflicts and the problems of life. I don't have to work at getting rid of all of them. I just have to learn to be loving. The most exhausting condition on earth, for example, right up there with anger, is fear. By comparison, finding and sharing real love is relatively easy. So let's look at just a few questions that I've gotten just in the past few days and demonstrate how we might answer them with what we've learned in the first 8 lessons of this boot camp. So first, let's summarize the principles that we've learned. We're addicted to imitation love and getting and protecting behaviors. This governs much of what we do all day long. We suffer from PCSD, post-childhood stress disorder. We've been told, I don't love you so many times that it has traumatized us just as though we were in an emotional battle. And the cure is found in remembering the things that are true. I have people in my life that love me. God loves me, so I'm never alone. I have everything I'll ever need and nothing to fear. I'm so grateful. Worthlessness is the root wound that we all suffer. Once somebody has been convinced through anger and manipulation and disappointment, or just simply being disregarded enough times, we come to believe that we are worthless, because after all, how could anybody continue to treat us like that unless we genuinely were worthless? And then we get caught in a loop of fear. We become afraid. We defend ourselves. The more we defend ourselves, the more we assassinate the people around us and drive them away from us, the less capable they become of loving us. And the less they love us, the more afraid we become. It's an endless loop. We get caught in a system that is governed by something that we've talked about in a past lesson: event, judgment, feeling, reaction. All these events have created the judgment that we are worthless. We feel afraid, and then we react with all the getting and protecting behaviors. And the solution to all that is begun by our telling the truth. As we do that, as we change our judgments, as we trust, we experience the freedom that comes from trusting people who are capable of unconditionally loving us, and then finally experiencing genuine happiness. And perhaps the first step to all of this is learning to listen. Even in the process of feeling love, listening might be the first step. Listening and trust would be inextricably intertwined. And then eventually we can eliminate all the behaviors, amongst which we included anger, which we've been talking about in the last two classes. So let's talk about some questions that I've been sent just in the last few days that would illustrate these principles that we've learned in the last 8 classes. Here's somebody who says, I used to spend all day swimming in a pool of imitation love. At my job, I worked for praise. At work, I got whatever praise and pleasure I could get. I got lots of sex in my life from every beautiful woman I could find, but I was miserable. If I couldn't have my head in a trough of imitation love, I felt completely alone and hated it. I was exhausted all the time trying to find relief from my pain, which I didn't even realize I was feeling at the time. I didn't know I was in pain because everybody around me was living the same way. Then I went to an intervention and I learned what love really was from a man, if you can believe it. The other day, I went to a party with a bunch of friends. I hadn't been to a party in ages. I felt lost. I was watching a festival of imitation love. And it was like I didn't know the rules of trading anymore. At first, I sat by myself. And then I sat by like one person at a time and began to tell people what I'd been learning. Before long, people were gathering around me, at least the ones that weren't drunk. I really only enjoy being around people in real love now. I could talk to them all day, and I do. In person, on the phone, by Skype. It's like a new way of living. Actually, it's like finally living. I mean, look at what this guy's teaching us. He was addicted all of his life to imitation love and getting and protecting behaviors. Looking at the PowerPoint slide here, he'd suffered from PCSD. He'd felt worthless all of his life. So of course he was addicted to imitation love and getting and protecting behaviors. He learned by having a loving experience, not by having sex with somebody, but loving experience from a man that he looked to as a father. By having enough loving experiences, new experiences, the E in EGFR, he changed his judgment that he was not worthless, that in fact he was very worthwhile and valued. And his feeling changed immediately. Once you change the judgment, all the rest of it just follows like poof. He wasn't afraid anymore. He didn't need to be addicted to all the forms of imitation love. Now, he doesn't say this, but it took him a little while to adjust. In fact, at first he went, well, if I'm not using imitation love and getting and protecting behaviors, what do I do with my day? Because that's all he ever did. But now, not only does he spend his time on the phone and in person and by Skype talking to people to feel loved, he's actually beginning to take calls from people and loving them, which is pretty cool. And he's doing better in his job and in everything else. He was about to lose his job, in fact, when I first met him. Even though he was enjoying a festival of imitation love, in his own words, he had no sense of confidence or self-worth. And so his performance at work was getting worse and worse, and he was about to be fired. And he says now his supervisors come to him and essentially said, I don't know what's been happening to you, but it's working because we were about to fire you last week, and now we find you a valued member of the team. Pretty cool. A woman called me because she had to do a presentation at work. The subject was how love can improve the workplace. She'd known about it for 2 weeks. She asked me if I'd help her write it. So I asked her, when was the presentation due? I always used to do this with my kids. They hated that. They'd say, Dad, can you help us write a paper? And my first question was always, so when's it due? And if they said tomorrow, I'd say, no, I won't help you. If you've written it a week before, I'll help you edit it. This was just like talking to one of my kids. I said, so when's the presentation due? Except hers was more dramatic because she said, it's due. I'm going to be doing the presentation in about 2 hours to a bunch of her coworkers and supervisors. So what are we seeing here? Why would she put herself in a position where she was virtually guaranteed to fail? Well, look at her slide here. She's been addicted all of her life to approval, and the prospect of losing it by doing a presentation to her peers and supervisors had her paralyzed for 2 weeks. She couldn't move. She couldn't even talk about it. She'd been addicted to running, which she was doing here by not preparing a presentation, to safety, to lying. She had lied and convinced herself that she just flat couldn't do it, couldn't be done. So she waited till 2 hours before it was due and said, well, would somebody help me? Which really means, would you do it for me? And addicted to being a victim. Because 2 hours beforehand, she came to me, and by that time, she's not asking for help. She's saying, rescue me. We see her evidence of worthlessness. If she felt like she were a worthwhile person, she would have just started on the project the day that she was given the assignment. But she didn't, because worthless people, it wouldn't matter whether they prepared. She was stuck in a loop of fear. Now, I'm not suggesting that you would tell her all this in a clinical way, and I didn't. I simply asked her if she'd read the workplace book. She said no, which seems like it'd be an obvious start to preparing a workplace presentation. See, because when you're worthless, preparation doesn't really help because you're still worthless. So you don't do it. You're paralyzed. Have you ever wondered why you get stuck in just not doing the jobs you know you're supposed to do? I knew a guy who was a really pretty famous medical school professor, and he was every year on the edge of losing his medical license because he'd never been unconditionally loved. He just couldn't organize his life. So he wouldn't fill out his medical license application on time each year. And each year somebody would have to do it for him, or he'd lose his license and lose his job. Because when you're worthless, doing mundane tasks like filling out paperwork, they don't make you happy. So why even start? So they don't, even though the result will end up being disastrous. Often what people call laziness is really just a sense of futility. Gosh, why should I even do that task? Nothing's ever made me happy. So doing this relatively mundane and tedious task isn't going to make me happy. So why even start? So I just sat there with her on the phone. I reassured her that I loved her. I said, tell them what you know about the effect of real love in your life and on your job, and you'll be fine. I just held her hand and offered very little in the way of advice. Certainly didn't write a presentation, which is what she was hoping I would just say, well, here, I'll send you my PowerPoint presentation on real love in the workplace, which I could have done, by the way, because I have several. But that wouldn't have helped her. Wouldn't have helped her grow in her confidence. I would have just rescued her. So she went and did the presentation. And she called later and she said that she was certain that she had blown it, that she felt stupid and uncomfortable and she was berating herself, which of course is what somebody does when they feel worthless. It's essentially her worthless default position. But then she called later and she said people came up to her after the presentation to say that she'd done a great job. So she felt much better about herself. So I said, so because you did better than you feel better about yourself because you did better than you thought, right? She said, yeah. And if you did better, then you must be a better person. Yes, you proved that you were not worthless, I said. There was a long pause. She knew I was tricking her. She said, I see what you mean. I said, really? Then tell me. She said, what I really need to learn from this is that I'm already worthwhile. I don't have anything to prove. If I'd felt worthwhile, I would have prepared this long ago because I wouldn't have been paralyzed by feeling worthless. And if I did a good job, fine. But I would only be more useful, not more worthwhile, right? Yes, I said, exactly. And what if you did a great job, but people had hated it? Because, see, she was elated because people liked it. She said, I get what you're saying now. It wouldn't matter. I can still be lovable, good presentation or not. But even if I perform well, some people won't like what I offer. That's always the case. That's more about them and their needs, not a description of me. Right. So what happened here? Using the PowerPoint that you see in front of you and what we've learned in the first 8 lessons, she has felt worthless all of her life, followed by the responses that are addictions to imitation love and getting and protecting behaviors, which we've talked about, running, victimhood, and so on. She was paralyzed. Why? PCSD, again, on the PowerPoint. What's the cure? The 5 truths. I just loved her and reminded her she wasn't alone, reminded her she had everything that she needed and had nothing to fear. And with that confidence, she went and did what I assume was probably a passable job, even though she still had a tinge of that I'm worthless left over, because afterwards she said, oh, I sucked and I wasn't very good. But see, she'd been trained to do that all of her life. As she felt loved, she could listen to what I was teaching her. And then later, she articulated her own lessons. I didn't have to teach them to her. She got them. Because as I loved her, her judgments changed. As I loved her and taught her, her judgments changed. I gave her new events, which led to new judgments, and then instantly that changed her feelings and reaction. So you can see that really listening to people is just not all that hard if you understand the principles on just this one PowerPoint. You can make a huge difference in people's lives. A woman called and she said, for years, I've taken a dance class once a week and I'm pretty good, but last night I had a horrible experience. There's one man in the class I really just don't mesh with, and last night I was paired with him before I could avoid being in the same part of the room with him, and it went just like I thought it would. He began to tell me how to do the steps. I already know how to do the steps. He just kept giving me advice I didn't want. So I finally left in the middle of the dance and walked out the door of the studio crying. One of the instructors chased me down and said I just shouldn't let him get to me. He does this kind of thing with lots of his partners, and I shouldn't take it personally. How do I get him to stop criticizing me? So I said, you know what, just for fun, I'll actually answer the question you've asked. And then I'm going to answer the question that would have been smarter for you to ask. So I said, you don't ever have to be in a position where you're required to be more loving than you're able. If you do that, you'll just empty out and feel terrible. Then you'll do and say things you'll regret later. So don't wait until you've emptied out. That's too late. Everybody tends to do that. Instead, when you sense that you're even close to empty, do something about it. Do something to get out. In this case, probably the first time this guy gave you advice, you could stop in the middle of the dance floor and ask him, look into my eyes. Why? Because otherwise he won't really be listening. And then you tell him, tonight I came here to dance. I did not come here to be instructed by my partner. So you may have meant well, but I don't want to hear any comments while we're dancing. Is that acceptable to you, or would you rather not dance? So what's the rationale? Again, back to our PowerPoint. She feels worthless. When somebody criticizes, even if they're not attacking, he may have meant well. He may have said it kindly. How can I know? She feels all the old pain, PCSD, and then runs, acts like a victim, gets sympathy, just feeds the old fear loop. We're already halfway through the slide. Something has to change. One way is not to endure more events that would lead to the same judgment, feelings, reaction. So she could withdraw before she becomes afraid and responds involuntarily by running. But is there another way? Yes. So after telling her what I just did, a way to withdraw from stress, I said, now, what if you were to simply remember that I love you, that God loves you, that you're never alone? In other words, the 5 truths. What if you were to remember that? What would the event have gone like? Remember, she has PCSD, so she overreacted to simple comments about how she moved her feet. I mean, it's a pretty small thing, and yet she ran out of the room crying. Solution, love. You think about it, I said, and you call me back with what you come up with. So she wrote a week later. She said, I just came home from the best dance I've ever had at the same class. She said, remember how I emptied out last week when I was criticized by a student dancer? He was a blessing in disguise because I thought long and hard about my dancing, and I realized that I dance for the wrong reasons. I've had this image in my mind that if I danced well, everybody would look at me, and I realized that all I was looking for was imitation love. So look what she learned already as a result of being loved. She realized that she was empty, alone, unloved, and went to praise as a solution. Again, we're just sticking with the things on this one PowerPoint. She said, sometime between the last class and today, I made a decision to drop that whole ballerina image because it was based on imitation love and attention. So I decided to remember what matters, the 5 truths. So I said them over and over during the class. I felt so peaceful, so patient, and I enjoyed watching other dancers connect and talk to each other during the dance. I'm so happy for how this feels. It feels so calm. I feel full of love and joy just thinking about how I had such great verbal conversations with other people who were dancing. She said, and I danced better because, now get this is the one, the next to the last one on the slide, because I was listening to the movement of my partner. We can communicate in a lot of ways. In dance, you have to be listening to the movement of your partner all the time, or you just will be dancing a solo. She said, why did I listen better? Because I actually cared about him, and it was much more fun. In fact, she said, it turns out that the criticism that the guy offered last week was actually right. What he was telling me was I was dancing selfishly. Now, what I didn't realize was it was because I was afraid. She said, tonight my head feels light. I'm in love. I like this. It's so awesome. I have enjoyed watching dancing and doing the dancing. I like the lightheartedness of this shift. So she actually listened. Her irritation vanished. Her sense of victimhood gone. Everything changed because her judgments changed. This person says, I had a brief relationship with a man in real love, but it became obvious fairly early on that he was more interested in me sexually than in who I really am. So I stopped our relationship, but he kept talking to me. He kept sitting by me in real love groups and was paying an unusual amount of attention to me. So I talked to her during this time. And she blamed him for toying with her, for hurting her feelings. She was really devastated by the fact that he was just paying attention to her because she felt like he was trying to use her. All PCSD. She had been used all of her life. I happen to know this guy, and yeah, there might be some possibility that he was using her to some extent. But overall, he's an innocent fellow. And I explained this, but she just kept feeling hurt, even though she was getting lots of love from other people every day. Weeks later, she wrote and said, after being loved by all these people, after being taught by these people, after they're attempting to give her new events to change her judgments, she finally listened. She said, I get it. This man has never met a woman who insisted that a relationship would be more than sex, so he didn't know what to do with me. And I didn't know what to do with his attention toward me. His reactions to me were out of his own neediness and pain, and so were mine. I didn't get that. I thought he was trying to hurt me. He wasn't, and I was overreacting to him. So look at how her perspective changed completely just by understanding where her judgments had come from and where his behavior had come from. A couple came for an intervention, and they had been separated. In fact, they lived in different cities. She was very controlling, and he was angry and critical and distant. All a fight for imitation love, mostly power. They were both fighting to control their relationship. They went home. They did great for about a week. And then she saw her therapist, who is a professional victim and victim trainer. If, as a therapist, you want to maintain a clientele forever, I've known therapists who have bragged to me that some of their clients have been coming to them for 20 years. No kidding. You would think that if you'd been seeing somebody for the same problem for 20 years, you'd be embarrassed to admit that rather than bragging about it. And the therapist convinced her that she had been victimized by her husband. Then she went and got the opinion of her friends. Well, what kind of friends do you think she chose? The friends that she chose in the past based on her previous anger and victimhood and need for power. So she began to demand more and more of her husband. So she suffers from PTSD, one of the elements of the slide here. Rather than practice the 5 truths, she went and got the opinion of other people who fed her addiction to imitation love and getting and protecting behaviors, which just kept her going in a loop of fear, and it got absolutely out of control. So instead of feeling loved, she simply demanded more imitation love. So she demanded more power. She wanted to be able to control the money that he gave their adult children in college and out of college, that he give the children more money. For what purpose? So that the children would be happy? No, because the more money that she negotiated for them on their behalf meant more praise for her. It made her a more worthwhile mother. Well, she just absolutely could not give up this need for praise. So on one occasion, he decided to bring into the house a massage chair that his friend had given him. And he wanted to put it in the living room because, well, that's where he watched television and wanted to get his massage. And they argued over that chair brutally for weeks. I finally got on the phone with them. She didn't want it in the living room because it would clash with the decor in the house, that her house, in fact, she said, that she had so carefully decorated. We talked for, probably 15 minutes, and she finally, they had 4 bedrooms because the 3 boys had moved out of the house. She finally agreed that there was one place in the house that he could sit in his massage chair, and that would be the garage. And she wasn't kidding, which was a little stunning to both me and to her husband. It was fight, 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 and it was all for power, not for principles. I tried to communicate to her that this was just going to keep her in a loop of fear and destroy her marriage. It was just going to lead to him moving out again, which he had done in the first place. And we had managed to convince him that it was worth trying the marriage again to move back into the house. She was right back to the same behaviors. She thought it was about financially helping the children. No, it wasn't. It was about them working together as a couple, and she was missing that point entirely. Everything was about power. In the process of talking to them, I introduced a concept that we'll probably talk more about when we talk about marriage, but it's far more important for a couple to agree on how to work something out than it is on whatever the final agreement is. And she just couldn't get that principle. So she kept at it, kept at the power, and now he's moved out and they're almost certain to get a divorce. It's always about love. And as soon as we lose track of love being the goal, we lose. I talked to a man the other day who fought in the Vietnam War. And every time he hears a sound, a helicopter going overhead, or a plane, or any sound that reminds him of anything that he heard in the war, he hits the ground, and it keeps him afraid all the time. So I talked to him just on the phone, and he said, I just don't see any reason why I should dig up the pain and bring it all back. And I asked him if he'd ever talked about his pain. Turns out he had. He had tried to talk to people in the military, and they had told him that he was just whining and complaining and he just needed to buck up. So I said, we're not digging up the pain just to dig it up and to feel it. It's all about you're digging up the pain and healing. So he talked about how his buddies were shot next to him, and he looked into their eyes and reassured them that they live when he knew that they wouldn't. He talked about the pain that he experienced when he shot and killed children and even babies in Vietnamese villages, and how these images haunted him all the rest of his life. He talked about his pain and his rage at the Oakland airport when, instead of being greeted as a war hero, where he'd gone to fight a war that nobody wanted, and that we all should have been grateful that he went to fight instead of us. I was one of them. I was exempted from the draft because I was in college at the time. And I was grateful to these guys. They went and fought when I didn't. When he came home from the airport, he was greeted by protesters who had signs and screamed at him and threw garbage at him and spit on him and called him a baby killer. And imagine how it affected him, because he was a baby killer. So we talked about his Vietnam experience, and I told him that all he's ever wanted was for somebody to hear his story, to hear his pain, to hear his anguish, to hear his helplessness at reassuring his buddies that they were not going to die when he knew they would, to have somebody come out of the audience when he came home to the Oakland airport and throw their arms around him and just say, thank you. How all he's ever wanted was to tell these stories and have somebody sit next to him and just hold his hand. Not give him sympathy, not tell him how to fix it, not telling him to buck up and be tough, just hold his hand. And he said, at the end of our discussion, which lasted for, 30, 40 minutes, he said, this means a lot to me. He said, I haven't felt this understood in my life. He felt it. He said it was incredible. He appreciated changing the judgments of his life. He'd walked around for most of his life, for 50 years, feeling like a baby killer and a monster, when what he really needed was just to feel understood and loved. So as we do feel loved, we give up our addictions to imitation love and getting and protecting behaviors. We give up our PTSD and our PCSD. We give up our root wound of feeling worthless. We lose our fear. We change our judgments. We learn to trust. We feel the freedom that comes from losing our anger and feeling genuinely happy. We're finally able to genuinely listen to people and learn to love them too. So we've learned a lot in 8 classes so far, and just kind of illustrating with this slide, which we'll probably use in the next couple of classes, how useful it can be to keep just a tiny handful of principles in our mind as people share with us the intimate circumstances of their lives, who they really are, their souls, if you like, and bond with them at a level that heretofore we'd never imagined. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to feel close to you. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks.